Good morning, guys. I hope things are going well. Um, I appreciate those of you that have been working hard to get things done, um, but that's not all of you. I haven't, some of you I haven't, and you know who you are, I haven't heard much from. Um, the worry is that we're doing this for a month. And if you're not taking it seriously and you're not working and you're not doing what I'm asking you to do, when we get back and we have assessments and we just keep moving on, assuming that everyone knows this material, then you're going to kind of be stuck. So you need to do what I'm asking you to do because we're not going to have time to recover all this material. Like we're doing this for a month. We're going to finish micro in this fashion. We're going to start macro doing this. So like you have to do the work I'm setting you. You have to keep working. There's no other way. So please make sure you're doing what I'm asking you to do. It's not much. It's not more than what we would normally be doing in class. So please get it done. If you're behind, which most of you are, you need to get caught up. We don't have as many classes this week, so hopefully you'll be able to focus and get a little bit more done. We've got a class obviously today. We've got a class on Thursday. We've got a class on Friday. Beyond getting your missing homework, for those of you that have missing homework, I need the IA. I need it. I have to be able to give you feedback. I need, at minimum, everything except for the evaluation section. You've been working on the IA for a month. There's no reason why it shouldn't be done. So you need to finish that and upload it to the assignment on Friday. If you haven't done that already, you need to do it because, yeah, it's a key component of the course, and you've had plenty of time to do it. So you need to get done. So what we'll be doing today is trying to finish chapter 12. We'll kind of see how that goes and how long the video is, and kind of go from there. So we'll share my screen and we can go from there. Okay, you should be able to see that now. Okay, so this is where we left off. So we've gone through the graphs of market failure. Now we're just going to go through some kind of more like real life situations in terms of market failure. Obviously, make sure you guys are taking notes because I will ask you to submit those to me. If we finish the notes today, then I'll ask you at the end of the video to send them. If we don't finish, then we'll do it next class. Okay. So when you're talking about an externality is an impact on a third party, right? So it could be negatively, where your action, a private action, is negatively impacting society. So think about smoking. Or it could be that something you're doing impacts society positively. So things like healthcare or education. Again, we tend to focus more on negative stuff than we do positive stuff. And a lot of the stuff we're actually going to talk about here in terms of externalities and market failure is negative, because it just tends to be where the IB focuses more. So one of the major kind of parts of a negative externality is this idea of what's called a common access resource. And a common access resource is something that everyone has access to, that you can't really, it says here, these resources are very hard to exclude people from. So these are things that everyone has access to, and there's not really a way to stop someone from using them. So the ocean that you see in the picture is a really good example of this. if someone wants to put a boat in the ocean, it's kind of hard to stop them from doing it. If someone wants to go swim in the ocean, it's hard to stop them. If someone wants to fish in the ocean, there's not a lot of regulation. Well, there is regulation, but it's hard to enforce because it's so big. Um, and then once you get a certain distance out, um, the ocean doesn't really belong to anyone at that point. Um, so the problem is because you can't charge people for using it, and because you can't control who's using it or how long they're using it, it creates a problem where people's best interest is to do what gains them the most utility. So if you're a fisherman, it's your interest to fish as much as you can, because if you don't fish, then other people will. So why should you fish sustainably when the person next to you isn't going to fish sustainably? So if you leave fish in so that they have a chance to reproduce and grow as their numbers, why should you do that when the person next to you won't? Um, a better example could be like in China, it's very common. Well, it used to be. It's getting a little bit better now to to kill sharks. Well, not maybe kill sharks, but capture them and cut off their fins. And there's been laws put in place for this, but it hasn't really worked as well as people would have hoped. Um, and the problem is because if you make something illegal, first of all, it increases the value, and then if a lot of people are doing it, why should one individual stop when someone else will just pick up and keep doing it? So there are a lot of kind of like real world applications to this. Shark finning is one of them. A lot of I could just think of fishing examples. There's a lot of different examples of like lobsters. Australia does some different things with lobsters to try to fix this issue. A lot of different countries have fishing laws. There's a lot of hunting laws as well to deal with this. The example we're going to look at on the next slide deals with like land usage, like land laws, um, which I'm not sure if the example is would happen in China as much because I don't really know the rules, but it is kind of common in the U.S. to see what we're about to see. But kind of to finish off here, individuals act in their own best interest. So an individual is going to try to gain as much utility from a resource as possible before other people can stop them from doing it. So if this problem isn't addressed, it's going to lead to market failure. So that's kind of what we're going to look at on the next slide.
This is a model called the tragedy of the commons, which should be called the problem with open access since it has little to do with the commons, and tragedy is kind of dramatic. Let's say there's some land with grass on it that people use as pasture for their animals. Nobody owns it, and anyone can come and graze their livestock here. We're assuming that people don't communicate or work together, so we would call this an open access field. Let's assume the number of animals this field can feed is based on the quantity and quality of the grass, which is based on the health of the soil, and it can only hold this many animals. This is the carrying capacity. If animals are added beyond this, the grass can't regrow fast enough to support them all. Also, the grass.
So that term carrying capacity is it's just kind of an important term to know. You could see it pop up. So if you don't know it, what it means, you could listen to the definition or you can just look it up yourself. But you should probably be familiar with the term carrying capacity.
Protects the soil from erosion. If too many animals are around, the field may decline in productivity, lowering the carrying capacity. The animals will be less healthy and provide lesser quality products, lowering the profit each animal provides. So it's in this group's best interest to keep the number of animals on the field at or below the carrying capacity. But every herdsman that puts an animal on the field will get the direct benefit that that animal provides for them, but they would only share a portion of the cost of the degraded field. If the field were at carrying capacity and a herdsman decides to add an extra animal, the added animal takes some of the food that would have gone to the others. This reduces their value. The owner of that additional animal comes out ahead because even though all his animals are a little bit less healthy, he has more of them. But each herdsman acts under these incentives and will keep adding animals to their herd or let their animals graze longer, so long as it's profitable to themselves. But really, they're all losing out, kind of like the prisoner's dilemma. Contrast this to a situation where only one person owns it. If they add an extra animal, they're only hurting themselves, so they don't do it. Since new people can't be excluded from the field, there's almost no point in boycotting the use because someone else could just come in. None of the herdsmen own the field, and they can see that the field may not be around forever. They see no point in conservation and just try to use it before someone else does. Okay, so we can go on to apply this model to unregulated open access fisheries, open access forests, and unregulated college dorm sink. The problem with applying this model to the real world is that we have to assume, among other things, that people don't communicate or work together, which isn't true. With a field like this, people will generally get together and make plans about its use. They may act as a single unit or just partition it into sections. They'll regulate the number of people that can use it. And if people are working together and communicating, then it's not really open access. It's not like every management situation is open access until somebody does something about it. So you don't tend to see the open access problem because people don't work together. You tend to see it in situations where people can't work together. Sometimes people are forced into a situation where they're not allowed to work together. Check out this video. Also, the larger the management area is, the more difficult communication and influencing each other becomes. For example, the global management of greenhouse gas emissions tends to take on some open access properties. Basically, this model is a way of communicating that when people can't work together on a resource, you call it open access. And which is why the model should have been called the problem with open access.
Okay, so the hopefully that is pretty clear, but the basic issue with the tragedy of the common or open access is that when people are unable to work together, they're going to act in their own best interest. So it's the job of the government to address this by putting in rules that either allow them to work together or set rules and limits that are enforceable. So you can only fish these days and you can only catch this many kilos of fish, or you can only graze this many cattle on this land, or dividing up land. One of the ways that a lot of people argue the best way to deal with an open access problem is actually to make public things private. So giving public land to private individuals. This is something that they've done in Africa with um, trying to protect animals from like poaching. So they've given public land that has different endangered animals on it to private individuals. And then those private individuals protect that land so that they can make money off of it by doing things like safari. So, an economic argument, if you were to evaluate this situation, would be that the best way to deal with the tragedy of the commons or open access is actually to make public goods private. And if you do that, then private individuals have more of an incentive to protect them because they are the ones that would then benefit from them. So I can look for, maybe I'll actually write this down. I'll look for maybe a reading for you on some of this stuff. So it's maybe I'll find a reading for you guys on open access so you can see some more examples, because a big part of part B of your paper is providing real world examples. So maybe if I find a couple readings on you for you, I can pass it on. Okay, so we'll watch one more video on this.
Let's say that we have three small ponds. So this is pond A, this is pond B, and this is pond C over here. And let's say that this first pond right over here, it's a privately owned pond. It's owned by Al. And this pond over here is owned by Carol. But this middle pond, pond B, I guess we called it to start off with, this is common land, or I guess this is a common pound, or this is open to the public. Open, open to the public. Open to the public. And let's say that Al and Carol, they're both fisher. I guess Carol would be a fisher woman. They both like to fish. That's how they make their living. And Al in his pond, he has fish in there, and he does some fishing in his pond, but he makes sure not to overfish because he doesn't want to deplete the stock of fish he has. So he fishes just enough that he can pay his bills and whatever else, but not so much that it depletes the fish and essentially makes them extinct in his pond. So he doesn't want to overfish. And Carol does the same thing. She's got fish in her pond, and she uses them to make a living. She gets them out and sells them and eats them and whatever else, but she's careful not to overfish, because if she overfished, there wouldn't be a next generation of fish. But over here in this public pond, there are also fish. There are also fish. I'll draw their fish in orange. There are also fish in this public pond over here. They're smiling. Maybe they won't be smiling for long. And what is going to happen? Anyone can go and fish in this public pond. So Al might say, and we're just assume we're in a world of two people, obviously the real world has people. Al will say, okay, I'm gonna be very careful in my own pond. I'm gonna fish just enough that I don't deplete the fish there. But any extra fish I need, I could go over here to this public pond and fish all I want. And I might be concerned about depletion in the public pond, except for the fact if I'm concerned about depletion, that's still not going to help the situation because other people might come and still not be so concerned. And so I won't even get the benefit of the depletion if I hold back and other people come and deplete the pond. So when you have this pond that is open to the public, all of the surrounding people, whether it's Al or Carol, or I guess you could have other people here, they would say, look, I'm going to fish here. I'm going to get some benefit. Even if I overfish, the benefit of overfishing, I'm going to get. In the near term, I'm going to get all of those fish, and then the cost of that overfishing, which is in the future, there won't be as many fish or no fish at all. That's going to be spread out amongst everyone else. And so you have the situation where because there's no one, I guess you could say, either owning this land or there's no one protecting this lake, or however you want to describe it. There's a rational, and I want to be clear, rational does not always mean good. There rational actors might decide to overfish, and essentially by doing that, everyone's going to be worse off. They're going to destroy the productivity of this pond. They're going to destroy the productivity of the pond right over here. And this idea that if there's this common land or common resource, in this case it was a pond, and people can spread out the costs and they get the benefits directly, you have a situation where that shared resource can get abused. And this is called the tragedy of the commons. So this is the tragedy of the commons, where in the example we did here, the pond is the common space that's being abused. And it's especially a tragedy, and I've already hinted at this already, is that even if Al decides that, hey, you know what, I'm going to hold back a little bit, I'm not going to fish so much because I don't want to deplete it. He'll say, but wait, if I do that, other people are going to come and deplete it, so I have no incentive to hold back. And so other people are also going to have the same logic, and then this thing is going to get here. And the classic example of tragedy of the commons, where the example was first given, was common grazing land. Same exact idea. If this was private grazing land over here, where I can keep my cows and my sheep, and this is private grazing land over here, where someone else has their cow and sheep, but this over here is literally a commons, where anyone can graze their cow and sheep, then just like the fishing, huge incentive for people to let their cow and sheep maybe overgraze the land, destroy the land, make it not sustainable, but the costs of it are going to be shared by everyone else, and the benefit of overgrazing, at least in the near term, you, the person who's overgrazing, is going to get from it. And you might even say, I'm not even the one overgrazing it. It's all of us collectively overgrazing, so you don't blame me. Now, what is the solution to the tragedy of the commons? How does a government or a jurisdiction or a group of people avoid this type of destruction of a resource? Well, one way that you could do is you could make this somehow into private land. So if that was owned by the government, it could sell it, auction it off to private people who could then sell access to this. Or if the government does retain control of it, it could sell permits to the land. So in this situation, you could sell permits. So it could figure out, hey, if someone fishes responsibly in a given day, they're going to get, I don't know, $200 of value by doing this. So we're going to make a permit cost, I don't know, $150, so someone still has an incentive to do it. But that will also limit the amount of fishing that can be there, and you could have some, conservationists that make sure that that not too many permits are given for this space over here. And we see that happening. If you wanted to go hunting, there are permits you need to have. If you want to go fishing in a lot of places, there are permits that you want to have. If you want to go camping in a lot of places, there are permits, because you could even over camp an area. If too many people are walking there, too much trash is there, it could ruin the campgrounds. And so this tragedy of the commons, the best way, or the way most often seen, is through this. The best way of preventing the tragedy of commons is through some type of a permitting process.
So you can see the examples he gave similar to the first video and similar to some of the solutions that I already talked about. Um, so one of the biggest potential solution to a problem of tragedy of the commons is making something private or limiting the access to it, and then maybe using that money to then like better protect what's there. So like if you go to parks in the US, especially national parks, like the big famous parks like Grand Canyon, you have to pay a fee to go in. And even though it's public space, the reason why they do that is because they use that money to then protect the land. Because if it was free and it was open, people might go in and destroy it. So the government protects it and they charge a fee, and then they use that fee to protect the land better. Okay, so a lot of this links to like some more environmental issues that we could kind of talk about. And as we move through the course, we actually talk more about this. We'll link it to the Sustainable Development Goals, which some of you are probably familiar with. Um, so obviously, you can see a picture of deforestation. Um, as a result of people trying to grow their economies, and which this is actually going to kind of link into moving into macroeconomics. Um, because people are pushing to grow their economies fast and improve the lives of their people fast and move people out of poverty quickly, it could lead to the negative impact on everyone else. So looking at the picture here, you've got deforestation. So you've got people cutting down trees either to sell the wood or to use that land for another purpose, or both. Um, but the problem is that what's more important, making money in the short term or having something there that you can use for the long term? So sometimes people will push for short term economic growth, growing the economy quickly, very fast, but in the long term, it hurts them. And this is something we talk a lot more about. Um, but a lot of these issues of tragedy of the commons is because people are pushing to make money very quickly. And as a result, it's going to impact everyone negatively in the long term. So we cut down all the forests to make money quickly by selling the wood. But then in the long term, we don't have those forests for animals and for biodiversity and for sucking up carbon dioxide and producing oxygen. So it has a negative impact on everyone in the long term, especially. So you might gain something beneficial in the short term, but in the long term, you're hurt negatively, and then everyone else in society is hurt negatively as well. So that is a big part of this. Like, there's a lot of real world applications to this. Um, if you need to pause it to take notes, that's fine. I'm going to move on now. Um, Another thing, obviously, is things like pollution, which we face all the time. Is similar idea. Factories are producing as much as they can, as quickly as they can. They don't always care about pollution and the negative impact on the environment and society because they're producing at a level that they need to. They produce whatever they can, and they're not really directly impacted by the pollution, so they just do whatever they want. But it leads to things like impacts on health, and it leads to impacts on the future generations, and it leads to impacts on the environment. And really, the only way to stop something like this is for the government to step in and put in place rules. Now, this could be rules like cap and trade or carbon tax, which is something we've talked about. It could be things like forcing companies to update by using better machines or different types of energy or closing factories. But production, if it's not controlled, is going to lead to a negative impact on society. One of the examples in the US would be things like government putting in rules in place to make sure that cars only produce a certain amount of greenhouse gases. So they control the amount of miles per gallon. So how efficient the car is. So they won't allow cars on the road that are not efficient. Um, China does this as well. I'm imagining every country does this. Is making sure that cars are updated so that they're not producing negative impact on the environment, or they're at least limiting the amount of impact on the environment. Okay, almost done here. Um, so we talked about cap and trade previously, so I can kind of go through it quickly. Um, Cap and trade was just a system that was put in place to kind of regulate the amount of carbon emissions that each country was made. Um, the basic idea was that countries could trade the amount of pollution that they can make. Um, so countries that weren't producing pollution could then trade off their ability to produce to other countries for money. So it's kind of like creating a currency, and that currency is pollution. And over time, you would lower the amount of currency available, and then over that would then force people over time to limit the amount of pollution that they made. It's kind of complicated, but it's actually a pretty smart idea. The problem is that it didn't work. Some countries have adopted it, but not all. Um, so as a result, it kind of fell apart. The biggest reason it did fall apart is because the U.S. Senate did not approve it, and you can see the countries that did not approve it. That's the US there, obviously, and that's Australia. So if the US isn't going to approve something, it probably won't get adopted. So as a result, some countries did adopt it, and some countries still follow it. But as a whole, it didn't work because the US didn't get on board with it. Okay, so this is a video about cap and trade. We've done reading on it, so I'm actually going to skip it. If you want to watch it, you can go into the PowerPoint and watch it yourself. So how are governments responding to this? What solutions have happened? Well, governments have found ways to produce and create things that try to address some of these negative externalities. So producing things like green technologies. So this could be things like solar, wind, hydro, or biofuels. And this is going to be a way to try to limit those externalities, negative externalities on society. Now, if you look at dams create a lot of other issues beyond. They might produce clean energy, but they also create a lot of other negative impacts. But beyond that, um, the government's role is to step in and try to address these things. And it could be by mandating that more wind power gets put in, or more solar panels are used, or there's increased investment in these types of things. But governments do try to address these things because it's their role. It's what they need to do to make sure that people are protected, the society is protected. So hopefully it didn't rush through that too quickly for you. You can pause it if you need to. These are actually the questions. I've actually posted these on Hunchback for you. I sent them to you in an email as well. So what I need you to do is work through them and make sure that you answer all the questions and you provide the graphs that are needed. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments or send them to me in an email or put them in the group chat. I hope you guys are doing well. Please let me know if you need anything. I won't see you, or at least I won't do a video for a couple days. Make sure you're working on the stuff that's missing. I will email you guys if I'm not hearing from you to make sure that I get it done. Make sure you get this work done as soon as you can. If you need extra time on something, I'm perfectly willing to give it to you. You just need to ask for it. So make sure that you're reaching out if you need anything. All right. Well, I will stop this. Have a good day. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys are staying safe. Thanks. Bye.